Kiera Hayes is dancing through exhaustion, 3 jobs, mounting debt, and a younger brother fighting for his life until the night she performs for a man who has stopped believing in miracles. At 24, Kiera balanced the weight of the world on shoulders that somehow still moved with grace. She was a professional contemporary dancer performing at the Hanok Cultural Center in the heart of Los Angeles' Koreatown, a place where traditional Korean architecture met modern California sensibility, where wealthy patrons came to feel cultured while sipping expensive wine. Her natural hair was swept into an elegant updo that took her 30 minutes. She did not have that morning. Each coil and curl pinned with precision that matched her dance training. Her body was lean and muscled from years of discipline, brown skin luminous under stage lights even when exhaustion pulled at every fiber of her being. The numbers haunted her during every waking moment. Marcus, her 19-year-old brother, had acute myeloid leukemia, the experimental CAR T-cell therapy that offered his best chance at survival cost $15,000 per month. Their insurance had denied coverage, citing the treatment as investigational despite 3 oncologists recommending it. Kiera had $8,000 saved from 2 years of working herself to the bone. She needed $180,000 for the full treatment course. The math was impossible. She worked 3 jobs, performing at the Cultural Center twice weekly, dancing at private events for wealthy clients who paid well but treated her like elegant furniture, and teaching children's ballet classes at a community center in Inglewood where the kids had more heart than money. If you are watching this from a city where dreams cost more than you can pay, where family obligation weighs heavier than your own survival, you understand what Kiera carried into that performance. Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from, and if you have ever had to choose between your own life and someone you love. The private evening event at the Cultural Center attracted the kind of wealth that did not advertise itself. 30 guests maximum, invitation only, each person representing the kind of power that shaped cities without ever appearing in newspapers. Kiera stood backstage in her performance costume, a fusion of contemporary dance wear and traditional Korean hanbok elements, deep crimson silk that moved like water against her skin. Her hands trembled as she stretched, not from nervousness about the performance itself, but from the fact that she had not eaten since yesterday morning. The protein bar in her bag was being saved for after this show, before she rushed to her midnight shift teaching late-night fitness dance classes at a 24-hour gym in Koreatown. The music began. Kiera took the stage. She performed a piece she had choreographed herself, a fusion of contemporary movement with traditional Korean fan dance, the large decorative fans becoming extensions of her arms as she moved across the polished wooden floor. Every motion was controlled, precise, beautiful. She poured everything into the performance because that was the only thing she could control. She could not control Marcus's cancer. She could not control insurance companies. She could not control the fact that she was slowly starving herself to save $30 a week on food. But she could control this. The arch of her spine, the extension of her leg, the flutter of the fan creating wind that caught the silk of her costume. For 8 minutes, she was not a desperate woman drowning in impossible debt. She was an artist. She was grace made physical. She was alive. In the back row of seats, arranged in a semicircle facing the small stage, sat a man who had come tonight out of obligation and stayed because of her. Jin Taeyong was 37 years old, Korean, dressed in an impeccably tailored dark suit that cost more than most people earned in 6 months. The suit was charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes visible only in certain light, cut to emphasize his lean athletic build, the kind of fit that came from custom tailoring and a body that knew violence intimately. His features were sharp and precise, high cheekbones and a strong jaw, dark eyes that missed absolutely nothing, hair swept back and styled with the kind of casual perfection that required significant effort to appear effortless. He sat with perfect posture, hands folded in his lap, completely still in a way that suggested controlled intensity rather than relaxation. Jin was the head of the Beck Syndicate's West Coast operations. He controlled territory from San Diego to San Francisco, oversaw protection rackets, gambling operations, loan services, and various import-export businesses that were sometimes legitimate and often not. He owned 12 cultural centers, restaurants, and entertainment venues throughout California, all of them serving as legitimate fronts for money that needed cleaning. This particular cultural center was one of his earliest acquisitions, purchased 9 years ago when he was still proving himself to the organization. He had come tonight because his presence was expected at these quarterly patron events. He stayed because the dancer on stage moved like she was trying to outrun death itself. Jean watched Kiera with the focus he usually reserved for evaluating threats or opportunities. She was extraordinary, not just technically skilled, though her technique was flawless, but something deeper. She danced with a kind of desperate beauty, like every movement mattered more than it should, like she was pouring her entire soul into 8 minutes of performance because those 8 minutes were all she had. It reminded him of things he had lost: grace, beauty, the belief that anything in the world existed beyond violence and money, and the slow accumulation of power that meant nothing when you returned to an empty house every night. He noticed other things too. The way her hands trembled during the final pose, barely visible, but there if you knew what to look for. The way she gripped the decorative fan too tightly, white knuckles against painted wood. The pallor beneath her brown skin that suggested she was not eating enough or sleeping enough or taking care of herself in any meaningful way. Jean had spent 20 years reading people for signs of weakness, desperation, opportunity. This woman was drowning and nobody else in the audience noticed because the drowning was wrapped in silk and set to music. The performance ended with Kiera kneeling center stage, fans spread like wings, head bowed in traditional gesture of respect. The small audience applauded politely. She rose slowly, bowed again, and as she straightened the room, tilted sideways. Kiera tried to hold her position. She had one more job tonight. She needed to get through the next 30 seconds, make it backstage, sit down for 5 minutes, then get to her car and drive to the gym. Just 30 more seconds. Her legs did not agree. They gave out completely, a sudden and total betrayal of muscle and bone, and she felt herself falling toward the hardwood stage floor that would absolutely break something important if she hit it at this angle. She did not hit the floor. Strong arms caught her, taking her weight easily, adjusting to support her without fumbling. Kiera's vision swam, but she registered expensive cologne, something woodsy and sharp, and the solid warmth of a body that knew exactly how to hold someone who had just collapsed. The world came back into focus slowly. She was being held by the Korean man in the expensive suit, the one who had been sitting in the back row watching her with unsettling intensity. Jean held the dancer carefully, noting her weight was far too light for her height and build, noting the way she immediately tried to push away from him despite barely being conscious, noting the defensive panic in her eyes that said she was used to men being threats rather than solutions. Staff members rushed toward the stage. Patrons stood, murmuring concern and curiosity in equal measure. Jin's voice cut through the noise with absolute authority. "Clear the room," he said. His tone was not loud, but it carried command that made people move without thinking. "Someone get water and food. Now." The event coordinator, a nervous man in his 50s who knew exactly who Jean was and what he controlled, immediately began ushering guests toward the exit. "Apologies for the disruption. The performance has concluded. Thank you for attending. Please enjoy the reception in the main gallery." The room emptied in under 2 minutes. Kiera tried to speak. "I'm sorry. I need to." She could not finish the sentence. Her mouth was too dry, and her head was spinning, and she was being held by a stranger who smelled expensive and felt dangerous. Jean studied her face. "When did you last eat?" he asked. His English was perfect, accent barely present, just the slight precision of someone who learned the language formally. "This morning," Kiera lied automatically. "I'm fine. Just got dizzy. Low blood sugar maybe. If you could just help me backstage, I'll be okay." Jin's dark eyes held hers with uncomfortable directness. "You are many things," he said quietly, "but fine is not one of them. Stop lying. It wastes both our time." Something about his tone, the complete lack of judgment mixed with absolute certainty that he saw through her defensive walls, made Kiera's eyes sting with tears she absolutely could not afford to shed. A staff member arrived with a bottle of water and a plate of food from the reception, small elegant portions of fruit and cheese and crackers. Jean took them without looking away from Kiera. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I think so." He helped her to her feet slowly, keeping one hand on her arm until she proved she was steady. Then he gestured toward a door at the side of the stage. "My office. You will eat." Then you will tell me what is killing you. It was not a request. Jin's office was located behind the main performance space, accessed through a hallway lined with traditional Korean art and modern security cameras. The room itself was a study in controlled luxury. Dark wood desk, leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with volumes in Korean and English, a window overlooking the center's meditation garden. Everything was expensive without being ostentatious, powerful without advertising itself. Jin guided Kiera to a leather couch, set the food and water on the low table in front of her, then moved to sit in the chair across from her rather than crowding her space. Eat, he said simply. Kiera wanted to protest. She had another job in 90 minutes. She did not have time to sit in a stranger's office eating expensive cheese while he watched her with eyes that saw too much. But her body betrayed her again. The moment the food was in front of her, the moment she allowed herself to acknowledge her hunger, she could not resist. She picked up a piece of cheese and ate it. Then another. Then crackers. Then strawberries that tasted like they cost more per pound than her rent. She drank the entire bottle of water in long, desperate gulps. She ate like someone who had been starving, because she had been. Jin watched without speaking. He pulled out his phone and made several calls, voice low and rapid in Korean. Kiera caught fragments. A name. Marcus Hayes. UCLA Medical Center. Leukemia. She froze mid-bite, strawberry halfway to her mouth, and stared at him. How do you know my brother's name? She asked. Her voice came out harder than intended, fear making her sharp. Jin finished his call and set the phone down. I make it my business to know who performs in my establishments, he said. More importantly, I make it my business to understand what drives people. You collapsed from malnutrition and exhaustion. That level of self-destruction requires significant motivation. A quick search of public records connected to your name showed a younger brother, current patient at UCLA Medical Center, diagnosis of acute myeloid leukemia, insurance denial for experimental treatment. The math is simple. You are working yourself to death trying to save him. Kiera set the strawberry down, appetite disappearing despite her body's desperate need for food. You have no right to investigate me. I have every right, Jin replied calmly. You fainted on my property. That makes you my responsibility until I ensure you are not a liability. His eyes never left hers. How much do you need? The question was so direct, so devoid of social pleasantry, that Kiera did not know how to answer. She settled on defensive truth. Why would you care? Jin leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in front of his face in a gesture that suggested he was considering how much to reveal. I had a sister, he said finally, younger than me by 8 years. She got sick when I was 26. I was too busy building my business to notice, too focused on proving myself to pay attention. By the time I understood she needed help, it was too late. She died because I had all the money in the world and no awareness of what mattered. I do not make that mistake twice. The pain in his voice was carefully controlled but present, a wound that had scarred but never fully healed. Kiera saw past the expensive suit and the cold authority to the man underneath who carried his own impossible weight. She understood him in that moment more than she wanted to. I need $180,000, she said quietly, for the full course of treatment. I have $8,000 saved. I'm working 3 jobs. It's not enough, and it will never be enough in time. Jin nodded once, as if she had confirmed something he already suspected. What if I offered you a way to get that money immediately? Kiera's heart kicked hard against her ribs. Nothing is free, she said carefully. What would you want in return? Jin stood and moved to his desk, opened a drawer, and removed a business card. He returned to place it on the table between them. Something far less than you are imagining, he said. I attend many events that require an elegant companion. Someone who understands presentation, performance, grace under observation. You would accompany me to these events 2 to 3 times weekly. You would live on my property where security is guaranteed. You would represent refinement in my world. In exchange, I pay for your brother's treatment in full and provide you a living stipend. Kiera stared at the card. It was thick black paper with silver lettering. Jin Taeyong. A phone number. Nothing else. She looked up at him. You want to hire me as? What exactly? Not as a prostitute, if that is your concern, Jin said bluntly. I have no interest in purchasing intimacy. I want someone who will stand beside me at gallery openings and business dinners and cultural events. Someone whose presence suggests I am more than what I am. Someone who makes me appear human to people who need to believe I am human. You are beautiful, articulate, and talented. You would serve that purpose well. This is insane, Kiera said. I don't know you. I don't know what you really do. I don't. I run criminal enterprises across the West Coast. Jean interrupted. I am not a good man by conventional standards. I am, however, a man who keeps his word and protects what is his. If you accept my offer, your brother receives treatment immediately. You receive safety and resources. All I require in return is your presence and your discretion. Kiera's mind spun. This was impossible. Dangerous. Wrong in every way that mattered. But Marcus was dying. The insurance company had denied the appeal yesterday. She was 3 months behind on her own rent. She had been seriously considering taking out loans from the kind of people who broke fingers when you missed payments. This man, this dangerous stranger with sad eyes and expensive cologne, was offering her brother's life on a silver platter in exchange for playing dress-up at fancy parties. I need to think, she said. You have 24 hours, Jean replied. After that the offer expires. He pulled out his phone again, typed something, then showed her the screen. This is the UCLA Medical Center payment portal. If you accept, $200,000 will be transferred to your brother's treatment account within 1 hour. Full payment for the experimental therapy and 6 months of follow-up care. Why would you do this? Kiera asked. Her voice broke slightly. You don't know me. Why would you help me? Jin's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Because I have more money than I will ever need and nothing meaningful to spend it on. Because watching you dance tonight reminded me there are still beautiful things in the world worth protecting. Because I failed my sister, and I will not watch another person destroy themselves trying to save family when I have the power to help. He stood, gestured toward the door. You should go home. Rest. Think about my offer. Call the number on the card when you decide. His eyes held hers one more moment. For what it matters, I hope you say yes. You deserve better than slowly dying on 3 jobs while your brother suffers. Let me give you both a chance at living. Kiera stood on shaking legs, took the business card, and walked out of his office in a daze. She made it to her car in the parking garage before she started crying. She cried for Marcus. She cried for herself. She cried because a dangerous stranger with dead eyes and a dead sister was the first person in 6 months to offer her real hope. She cried because she already knew she was going to say yes. Because when you are drowning, you do not question the ethics of the person throwing you a rope. You just grab on and pray they pull you to shore before the water fills your lungs. Kiera Hayes sat in her car in the parking garage for 20 minutes before she trusted herself to drive. The business card felt impossibly heavy in her hand. Thick black paper with silver lettering that caught the dim fluorescent light. Jean Taeyong. A phone number. The promise of everything she needed wrapped in danger she could not quantify. She should throw it away. She should forget this entire night happened. She should find another way, any other way, that did not involve accepting help from a man who admitted to running criminal enterprises with the same casual tone someone might use to discuss the weather. She drove to the 24-hour gym anyway. She taught her midnight fitness dance class to 17 exhausted people who worked day jobs and could only exercise after dark. She smiled and counted beats and demonstrated movements while her mind spun through impossible calculations. Marcus needed treatment that cost $15,000 per month. She made barely $4,000 monthly across her 3 jobs. Even if she quit eating entirely, quit paying rent, quit existing in any meaningful way, the math did not work. It would never work. Jean Taeyong's offer was insane. It was also the only lifeline anyone had thrown her in 6 months of drowning. At 2:30 in the morning, Kiera sat in the UCLA Medical Center parking lot staring at the building where her brother slept in a room that smelled like antiseptic and fear. She had visited him yesterday. He had smiled at her with the kind of determined optimism that broke her heart, telling her about the book he was reading, the nurse who snuck him better food, his plans for when he got better. Not if, when. Marcus still believed in miracles. Kiera had stopped believing months ago. Until tonight. Until a dangerous man with sad eyes offered to be her miracle in exchange for her presence at parties. She went home to her studio apartment in Koreatown, the kind of place where the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors breathing and the rent was still more than she could afford. She did not sleep. She stared at the ceiling and thought about Jean Taeyong's words. You deserve better than slowly dying on 3 jobs while your brother suffers. Let me give you both a chance at living. At 6 in the morning, she called the number on the card. Jean answered on the second ring. His voice was alert, no trace of sleep. Miss Hayes, I assume you have made your decision. Kiera took a breath that hurt her chest. I need to know exactly what you expect. All of it. No surprises. Come to the cultural center at 10 this morning, Jean said. We will discuss terms properly. Then you decide. She agreed and ended the call. 3 hours later, she stood in the cultural center's empty lobby wearing the nicest dress she owned, a simple black sheath that had cost her 2 weeks of grocery money 2 years ago. A staff member she recognized from last night escorted her to Jin's office. He was already there, seated at his desk, wearing another perfectly tailored suit, this one darker than last night, charcoal verging on black. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit, he said. Then, before she could speak, he slid a manila folder across the polished wood surface. This is everything I learned about your situation. I want you to see that I am not hiding my investigation. Kiera opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were printouts. Marcus Hayes, patient records, diagnosis details, insurance denial letters, her own employment records, her lease agreement, her bank statements showing the steady decline of her savings. Everything. Her entire desperate life reduced to 20 pages of documents. She should be furious at the invasion of privacy. Instead, she felt relieved. He knew the worst already. She did not have to perform being okay. How did you get all this? She asked quietly. I have resources, Jean replied. Money purchases access. I wanted to understand your situation completely before making my offer official, so there would be no misunderstanding about stakes or necessity. He leaned forward slightly. Your brother's prognosis is good if he receives the CAR T-cell therapy. 70% remission rate for his specific markers. Without it, he has perhaps 4 months. You already know this. You have been living with these numbers for 8 months. Kiera closed the folder. She met his eyes. Tell me what you want from me. Everything. Jin's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his gaze, a flicker of what might have been respect. Very well. Complete transparency. He stood and moved to the window overlooking the meditation garden. I will pay $200,000 directly to UCLA Medical Center for your brother's treatment. The full course of CART therapy, 6 months of follow-up care, and a reserve fund for complications. Additionally, I will provide you $5,000 monthly for your personal expenses. You will live on my property in a private guest house. You will have your own space, your own privacy, your own life when you are not required. Required for what exactly? Kiera asked. Jean turned to face her. I attend many events. Gallery openings, charity functions, business dinners, cultural performances. I require a companion who presents well. Someone elegant, intelligent, capable of conversation with wealthy patrons and political figures. Someone who makes me appear to be more than a criminal with money. You would dress appropriately. I will provide wardrobe and styling. You would stand beside me at these events. You would be charming and gracious. You would represent refinement. That is all. Kiera's mind raced. That's all. Just go to parties with you. Not just parties, Jean corrected. You represent me. That means understanding who I am and what I do while never speaking of it to anyone. Total discretion about my business operations. Absolute loyalty. If I tell you we are leaving an event, we leave immediately without question. If I introduce you to someone, you are pleasant regardless of who they are or what you know about them. You become part of my world while remaining separate from its darkness. And if I refuse to do something you ask, Kiera said carefully, if I want to leave the arrangement. Jin's eyes held hers with uncomfortable intensity. Then you leave. I will not hold you prisoner. However, the medical payments stop immediately. Your brother's treatment ends. You return to your 3 jobs and your impossible mathematics. I am offering you a transaction, Miss Hayes, not a prison sentence. But transactions have terms and consequences. Kiera stood and moved toward the window, needing distance to think. How long would this arrangement last? As long as necessary, Jean said. Minimum 1 year. If your brother responds well to treatment, if he achieves remission, we can renegotiate. But I require stability. I cannot have you leaving in 3 months when the situation becomes uncomfortable. What about my dancing? Kiera asked. I can't just stop performing. You will not stop, Jean replied. I will arrange a private studio space. You can continue practicing, teaching, even performing if you wish at venues I control. Your art matters. I am not asking you to give up who you are. I am asking you to add a role to your life in exchange for saving your brother." Kiera turned to look at him. The morning light through the window cast his face in sharp relief, emphasizing the controlled intensity, the intelligence, the carefully hidden loneliness. "Why me specifically? You could hire any woman in Los Angeles to stand beside you at parties." Jean was quiet for a long moment. "Because most women in Los Angeles would see me as an opportunity for wealth and status. They would want more than I am offering. They would fall in love with money and convince themselves it is love for me. You do not want anything from me except your brother's survival. That makes you safe. And last night when you danced, I saw someone who understood what it means to pour everything into something beautiful even when the world is ending around you. I respect that. I want that near me." His honesty was more disarming than charm would have been. Kiera felt the wall she had built around herself shifting. This man was dangerous. He was probably violent. He was definitely criminal. But he was also human in ways she had not expected. She thought of her own loneliness. The way she had isolated herself for 8 months, too exhausted to maintain friendships, too desperate to pretend things were okay. She understood being alone in a room full of people. She understood pouring yourself into something because it was the only thing you could control. "I need to see the contract," she said. "I need legal terms. Something binding that says you will continue Marcus's treatment regardless of whether the arrangement works out." Jean moved to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a document. "I had this prepared last night," he said, handing it to her. 40 pages. My attorney drafted it. You should have your own lawyer review it before signing. The key points. I guarantee full payment for your brother's treatment regardless of the arrangement's length. If you choose to leave after 6 months, treatment continues. The only way treatment stops is if you violate the confidentiality clause by exposing my business operations to law enforcement or media." Kiera read through the contract slowly. It was exactly as he described. More generous than it needed to be. Protections for her written explicitly. The only consequences fell on her if she betrayed him, not if she simply walked away. She looked up. "You are giving me all the power here." "Not all," Jean corrected. "But enough. I do not want a prisoner, Miss Hayes. I want a willing participant who understands the arrangement and chooses it freely. Coercion breeds resentment. Resentment breeds betrayal. I am building something based on mutual benefit, not force." Kiera set the contract down. "I need 24 hours to have a lawyer review this." "You have 48 hours, Jean said. Use them well." He pulled out his phone and typed briefly. "I just sent you contact information for an attorney who specializes in unusual contractual arrangements. She is discreet, and she is not on my payroll. She will give you honest assessment." His dark eyes met hers. "I want you to be certain, Miss Hayes. Once you accept, once your brother's treatment begins, the consequences of betrayal are severe. I need you to understand the weight of this choice." Kiera nodded slowly. She understood. She was choosing to enter a criminal's world in exchange for her brother's life. She was trading her safety for his survival. She was accepting that sometimes morality was a luxury she could not afford. "Before you go," Jean said quietly, "there is one more thing." He moved to stand directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, woodsy and sharp and expensive. "I do not lie to people I do business with. So I will tell you this honestly. My world is violent. I have enemies. Being near me means accepting that danger exists even when you cannot see it. The security I provide is real because the threats are real. If that is something you cannot live with, walk away now. Do not wait until you are trapped." Kiera looked up at him. "Have you ever hurt women?" "Never," Jean said flatly. "I have killed men who hurt women. I have ended operations that trafficked women. I have many sins, Miss Hayes, but that is not one of them. My sister died because a man put his hands on her in ways she did not want. I remember what that taught me." The pain in his voice was leashed but present. Kiera believed him. She did not know why she believed him, but she did. Instinct, maybe, or desperation making her see what she needed to see. Either way, she nodded. "I will review the contract and call you in 2 days." Jean inclined his head. "I will await your decision." Kiera left his office and spent the next 48 hours in a haze of anxiety and calculation. She met with the attorney Jean had recommended, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who reviewed every line of the contract and pronounced it surprisingly fair for this type of arrangement. She visited Marcus and did not tell him about any of it. She danced in her tiny apartment, letting movement clarify thought the way it always did. She weighed her pride against her brother's survival. She weighed her safety against his hope. The mathematics were brutal but simple. Without Jean Taiyang's offer, Marcus died. With it, he lived. Everything else was secondary. On the second day, at exactly 10 in the morning, Kiera called the number on the black business card. Jean answered immediately. "Miss Hayes, your decision." "I accept," Kiera said. Her voice was steady. "I have 3 conditions beyond what is in the contract. I want weekly video calls with Marcus from wherever I am living. I want my own phone that you do not control or monitor. I want written confirmation that if I die, the medical payments continue until Marcus's treatment is complete." Jean was quiet for a moment. "Agreed on all 3 conditions. I will have an addendum drafted today. Can you come to the cultural center this afternoon to sign?" "Yes." "Good. Come at 4. Bring whatever personal items you want to keep. You will move to the estate tonight." His voice softened slightly. "You are making the right choice, Miss Hayes. Your brother will live. That is what matters." Kiera ended the call and sat in silence. She had just agreed to become a criminal's companion. She had just traded her freedom for her brother's survival. She should feel trapped. Instead, she felt something like relief. The impossible mathematics that had consumed her for 8 months finally had a solution. It was a dark solution wrapped in danger and moral compromise, but it was a solution. That afternoon, Kiera returned to the cultural center. Jean was waiting in his office with the contract, the addendum with her 3 conditions, and a black leather wallet sitting prominently on the corner of his desk. He gestured to the documents. "Read through the addendum. If everything is correct, we sign and move forward." Kiera read carefully. Her conditions were written exactly as she had stated them. Clear, binding, protected. She picked up the expensive pen Jean offered and signed her name. Jean signed as witness. It was done. "Now," Jean said, standing, "I need to make a phone call. I will be 10 minutes. Make yourself comfortable." He left the office, closing the door behind him. Kiera sat alone in the expensive leather chair. Her eyes drifted to the black wallet on the desk. It was clearly Jin's. Expensive leather, subtle designer logo, the kind of item that cost more than her monthly rent. It sat there, forgotten or placed deliberately. She could not tell which. She stared at it. Her hand moved toward it slowly. She could open it. See how much cash a man like Jean Taeyong carried. Maybe take some. He would never know exactly how much had been there. She could have a few $100s for herself, for emergencies, for the sudden panic of having nothing. Her hand stopped an inch from the wallet. She pulled it back, sat on her hands like a child afraid of temptation. This was insane. She was not a thief. Desperate did not make her dishonest. She would not start this arrangement by proving she could not be trusted. The wallet sat there, untouched, for the full 10 minutes. Jean returned. His eyes went immediately to the wallet, noted its exact position, noted Kiera sitting with her hands folded in her lap. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Something like satisfaction. Something like respect. "You passed," he said quietly. Kiera stared at him. "That was a test." "Everything is a test, Miss Hayes." Jean picked up the wallet and put it in his jacket pocket. "I left significant cash and several important documents in that wallet. You did not touch it. That tells me your desperation has not broken your character. That is rare. That is valuable." His dark eyes held hers. "Many people would have taken the money. They would have justified it. You did not. I respect that." Kiera felt anger flash through her exhaustion. "You manipulated me. I tested you," Jean corrected. "There is a difference. I needed to know if I was bringing someone trustworthy into my home or someone who would steal from me the moment I turned my back. Now I know." He moved toward the door. "Come. I will drive you to the estate. We will get you settled. Tomorrow your brother's treatment begins." Kiera stood on shaking legs. She followed Jean Taeyong out of his office, into his expensive car, toward his fortress home, into his dangerous world. She had made her choice. She had traded everything familiar for Marcus's survival. As they drove through Los Angeles traffic toward the Hollywood Hills, toward a life she could not imagine, Kiera watched the city blur past her window. She was not free anymore. But Marcus would live. And sometimes that was the only mathematics that mattered. Sometimes you chose the devil you knew over the death you feared. Sometimes survival required compromises that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. She had danced through desperation for 8 months. Now she was dancing into danger. But at least she was no longer dancing alone. Jean Tiang's estate sat high in the Hollywood Hills behind walls that looked decorative but were reinforced steel disguised as stone. The gate required 3 separate security clearances to open. Armed guards in discreet positions watched the perimeter with the kind of alertness that came from military training and significant payment. As Jin's black Mercedes climbed the winding driveway, Kiera pressed her face to the window and tried to comprehend the scale of wealth she was entering. The main house was modern architecture at its most severe and beautiful, all glass and steel and dark wood, sharp lines and dramatic angles, windows that reflected the Los Angeles skyline like mirrors. It looked like power made physical, like money that no longer needed to announce itself because its presence was absolute. Your quarters are separate from the main house, Jean said as he parked in a garage that held 6 other vehicles, each one worth more than Kiera had earned in her entire life. You will have complete privacy. I value my solitude, and I assume you value yours. He led her along a stone pathway through gardens that were minimalist and Japanese-influenced, carefully arranged rocks and precisely trimmed plants, the sound of water from hidden fountains. The guest house appeared after a curve in the path. It was smaller than the main house, but still larger than any apartment Kiera had ever lived in. Modern like the main structure, floor-to-ceiling windows, clean lines, everything expensive and elegant. Jean opened the door and gestured for her to enter. The interior took Kiera's breath away. Open floor plan, kitchen with appliances she did not recognize, living area with furniture that looked like art, bedroom visible through an open doorway, and most importantly, an entire room dedicated to dance. Mirrors covered one wall. Professional flooring that would protect her knees and ankles. A bar. Sound system. Everything a dancer could want. Kiera walked into the studio space and felt tears burn her eyes. She had not expected this. She had expected a room, a bed, a place to sleep between obligations. She had not expected Jean Taeyong to care about her dancing enough to build her a sanctuary. This is too much, she said quietly. Jean stood in the doorway watching her. It is exactly enough. You cannot perform for me if you cannot practice. Your art matters. I told you that. His voice was matter of fact, like designing a private dance studio for a woman he barely knew was completely normal. Everything you need should be here. If something is missing, tell me. You have my number. He turned to leave, then paused. Your brother's treatment begins tomorrow morning at 8. I will drive you to the hospital if you wish. Or I can send a car. Your choice. Kiera wiped her eyes quickly. I would like you to drive me. If that's acceptable. Jean nodded once. I will be here at 7:30. He left, closing the door behind him, leaving Kiera alone in more luxury than she had ever inhabited. She spent the first hour just walking through the space, touching expensive things carefully, afraid to break something that cost more than she could repay. She unpacked the single suitcase of belongings she had brought. Her clothes looked shabby hanging in the massive closet next to empty space meant for a wardrobe she did not own. She took a shower in a bathroom with heated floors and a shower head that felt like rain. She stood in the dance studio and moved through exercises while watching herself in the mirrors. This was her life now. This impossible, beautiful cage purchased with her brother's survival. The next morning, Jean arrived at exactly 7:30 wearing another flawless suit, this one charcoal with a subtle sheen. Kiera wore her nicest jeans and a sweater, feeling underdressed next to him. They drove to UCLA Medical Center in comfortable silence. Jin's presence was calming in a way Kiera had not expected. He did not fill silence with unnecessary words. He simply existed next to her with quiet certainty that everything would be handled. At the hospital, he walked with her to the administration office. A woman Kiera had never seen looked up when they entered, recognition and deference immediate on her face when she saw Jean. Mr. Jean, she said, everything is arranged as you requested. She turned to Kiera. Miss Hayes, the payment for your brother's treatment has been processed. $200,000 applied to Marcus Hayes' account. The CART cell therapy begins today. Dr. Morrison will brief you on the treatment schedule. Kiera stared at the confirmation on the computer screen. The impossible number. The treatment that had been denied for 8 months. Real. Paid. Happening. Her legs felt weak. Jin's hand appeared at her elbow, steadying her without making it obvious. Thank you, he said to the administrator. We would like to see Marcus before the treatment begins. They went upstairs. Marcus was in his room, thinner than the last time Kiera had seen him 3 days ago, but his eyes were bright with hope when she walked in. His expression changed when he saw Jean behind her. Confusion and wariness crossed his face. Who is this? Kiera sat on the edge of his bed and took his hand. This is Jean Taeyong. He is the patron I told you about, the one who is paying for your treatment. She had rehearsed this carefully. Marcus, this is really happening. The treatment starts today. You are going to get better. Marcus looked between his sister and the dangerous-looking man standing quietly in the corner. His voice was careful. How much is this costing you, Ki? Nothing I cannot afford, Kiera said, which was technically true in the worst way. I want you to focus on getting well. That is all that matters. She hugged him tightly, feeling his too thin body against hers, feeling the relief and fear and desperate hope all tangled together. I will be here every day. You are not alone. Jean stepped forward then. His voice was respectful, almost gentle. Marcus, your sister has agreed to work for me in exchange for covering your medical care. She is performing at events I host. Nothing dangerous, nothing inappropriate. She is talented, and I value that talent. You should be very proud of her. She is remarkable. Marcus's eyes searched Jin's face looking for lies or threats. He found something that satisfied him because he nodded slowly. Thank you, sir. I don't know how to repay this. You repay it by surviving, Jean said simply. By fighting hard and becoming healthy. Your sister needs you to succeed. Do not disappoint her. It was phrased like a command, but the underlying emotion was something softer. Jean understood what it meant to lose a sibling. He would not let Kiera experience that if money could prevent it. They stayed until the medical team arrived to begin the treatment protocol. Kiera kissed Marcus's forehead and promised to return tomorrow. In the car driving back to the estate, she cried quietly. Jean said nothing, simply drove and let her process. When they arrived, he spoke for the first time. He will survive this. The therapy has a high success rate. Have faith in his strength. Then he left her at the guest house, respecting her need to be alone. Over the next weeks, a routine developed that Kiera had not anticipated. She woke early and danced in her studio, working through combinations and stretches, maintaining the discipline that had defined her life since childhood. Jean sometimes appeared in the doorway to watch, never entering, never interrupting, just standing in silence while she moved. His presence should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt like appreciation, like someone who understood that watching art being created was a privilege, not a right. After dancing, she would visit Marcus at the hospital for a few hours. The treatment was brutal. He was sick and exhausted and losing weight. But the doctors were optimistic. The cancer markers were responding. Hope existed in blood test results and cellular counts. 3 evenings each week, Jean required her presence at events. He sent a stylist to the guest house who brought dresses Kiera would never have chosen for herself. Elegant, expensive, perfectly fitted. She learned quickly that Jin's world operated on unspoken rules. Never ask questions about business. Never react to names or conversations she overheard. Smile graciously. Be charming but not memorable. Represent refinement without drawing attention. At a gallery opening in Beverly Hills, she stood beside Jean while wealthy collectors examined abstract paintings that cost more than most houses. Men and women approached Jean with deference that bordered on fear. He introduced Kiera simply as his companion. No last name. No details. She noticed how people treated her after that. Careful, respectful, slightly afraid. Being Jean Taeyang's companion apparently came with reflected power. After the gallery opening, in the car, Jean spoke quietly. You did well tonight. Several people commented on your grace. You have good instincts for when to speak and when to remain silent. That is valuable in my world. Kiera looked at him in the dim interior of the Mercedes. I thought it would be harder, playing this role. But it is just another kind of performance. Different stage, different audience. Jin's mouth curved slightly. That is exactly right. Everything is performance. The difference is consequences. If you miss a step in dance, the audience forgets by next week. If you miss a step in my world, people die. But you will not miss steps. You are too disciplined. The compliment settled warm in Kiera's chest. She was beginning to understand Jean Taeyong. He was not cruel. He was not unnecessarily harsh. He was simply a man who had built an empire in darkness and no longer knew how to exist in light. Except when he watched her dance. Then something softened in his face. Something that looked almost like peace. 6 weeks into the arrangement, Kiera could not sleep. Marcus had been particularly sick that day from the treatment, and seeing him suffer had torn something open in her chest. At 2 in the morning, she left the guest house and walked to the main house, needing tea, needing distraction, needing anything but lying awake staring at the ceiling. She found Jean in the kitchen, sitting at the island with a glass of whiskey, tension in his shoulders that was unusual for him. He looked up when she entered but did not seem surprised. "Cannot sleep either," he said. It was not a question. Kiera moved to the kettle and started heating water. "Marcus had a bad day. Seeing him sick makes me feel helpless. I know the treatment is working, but watching him suffer is killing me." Jean sipped his whiskey. "My sister used to call me crying when she was sick. I was always too busy to take her calls. Always in meetings, or handling problems, or building my reputation. I thought there would be time later. I was 26 and invincible and stupid. There was not time later. By the time I made time, she was gone." The pain in his voice was raw despite the careful control. Kiera poured her tea and moved to sit across from him at the island. "How did she die?" "Her boyfriend beat her to death," Jean said flatly. "Slowly over several months. She hid it well. Wore makeup. Made excuses. I did not see because I was not looking. When I finally understood, I tried to get her away from him. She said she loved him. She said he would change. 3 weeks later, she was dead. He was arrested but got 2 years because he claimed self-defense, and she was not there to contradict him." Jin's hand tightened on the whiskey glass. "I killed him the day he was released from prison. Slowly. Painfully. It did not bring her back, but it kept him from hurting anyone else." Kiera should have been horrified. Instead, she felt something like understanding. "Your sister is why you help women." Jean met her eyes. "My sister is why I do not ignore suffering when I have power to stop it. Money is meaningless if it does not protect people who need protection. You needed protection. Your brother needed mercy. I can provide both. It does not absolve my sins, but it gives them purpose." "Why are you so lonely?" Kiera asked quietly. "You have money and power and people who work for you. But you are the loneliest person I have ever met." Jean was silent for a long moment. "Because I built everything I have by trusting no one. Because in my world, closeness is weakness and weakness gets you killed. Because I am very good at surviving and very bad at living." He looked at her with unexpected vulnerability. "Until you. Watching you dance reminds me that beautiful things exist. Having you in my home reminds me that not everything is violence and calculation. You make loneliness less obvious." Kiera felt her heart shift. She reached across the island and touched his hand. "I understand loneliness. I have been alone for 8 months taking care of Marcus with no one to help me. I pushed away friends because I was too exhausted to pretend I was okay. I isolated myself until I forgot what connection felt like. You gave me back my brother's future. That is not nothing, Jean. That is everything." Their hands stayed touching on the cold marble surface. Two lonely people finding unexpected connection in the small hours of morning. Jin's thumb brushed across her knuckles once before he pulled away. "You should sleep. Marcus needs you strong tomorrow." Kiera nodded and took her tea back to the guest house. But something had shifted between them. They were not just employer and employee anymore. They were two people who understood what it meant to survive at the cost of living. 2 months into the arrangement, Marcus's latest scans showed significant improvement. The leukemia was retreating. The CAR-T cells were working. His doctor was cautiously optimistic. If this trend continued, Marcus could be in remission within 3 months. Kiera sobbed in the hospital bathroom, relief so intense it hurt. When she emerged, Jean was waiting in the hallway. He said nothing, just opened his arms. She walked into them and let herself be held. His embrace was warm and solid and safe. She felt his heart beating steady against her ear. When she finally pulled back, his eyes were gentle. "He is strong," Jean said. "Like his sister. He will survive this." "Thank you," Kiera whispered. "For everything. For his life. For mine." Jin's hand cupped her face briefly. "You earned this by accepting my offer. The gratitude is mutual, Kiera. You have given me something I did not know I needed. Companionship that is real, not purchased. You see me as human despite knowing what I am. That is rare." Kiera realized in that moment she was falling in love with Jean Taeyong. Not because of his money or his power or his protection. Because he was gentle with her brother. Because he watched her dance like it mattered. Because he was honest about his darkness instead of hiding it. Because he was as lonely as she was and trying just as hard to survive. The realization terrified her. Falling in love with a crime lord was not part of the arrangement. It was dangerous and complicated and probably stupid. But her heart did not care about logic. 3 months into living on the estate, the physical awareness became impossible to ignore. Kiera noticed everything about Jean. The way he moved with controlled grace. The scent of his cologne that made her want to lean closer. The rare moments when he smiled and his entire face transformed. The intelligence in his eyes when he listened to her talk about dance or Marcus or meaningless things. She caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Hunger, maybe. Or longing. Something that matched what she felt. One evening after an event, Jean walked her back to the guest house instead of sending her alone. They stood on her doorstep in the darkness, city lights glittering below the hills. "Thank you for tonight," Jean said quietly. "You were perfect. As always." Kiera looked up at him. "I am not always perfect." "You are to me," Jean said. His hand reached up to touch her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. Then he stepped back quickly as if remembering boundaries. "Good night, Kiera. Sleep well." She watched him walk back toward the main house and wanted to call him back. Wanted to ask him to stay. Wanted to cross the line they had been carefully maintaining. But she said nothing. Let him go. Told herself this arrangement was professional despite everything screaming that it had become deeply personal. For months into the arrangement, Kiera started feeling strange. Exhausted despite sleeping well. Nauseous in the mornings. Emotional in ways that were not normal for her. She assumed stress. Marcus's treatment was intense. The events with Jean were mentally draining. Her body was probably telling her to rest more. But after 2 weeks of feeling progressively worse, Jean noticed. He found her one morning sitting on the floor of her dance studio, too dizzy to stand after attempting warm-ups. "You are seeing my physician today," he said firmly. "This is not negotiable." An hour later, Dr. Morrison arrived at the estate, a kind-faced woman in her 60s who examined Kiera thoroughly and asked careful questions. Then she took a blood sample and left, promising results within hours. Jean stayed, sat with Kiera in her living room while they waited. His presence was calming even though tension radiated from him. When his phone rang with the results, he answered on speaker so Kiera could hear. "Mr. Jean," Dr. Morrison said. "Miss Hayes is pregnant. Approximately 8 weeks based on blood work. She is healthy but will need prenatal care immediately." The silence that followed was absolute. Jin's face showed emotions Kiera had never seen him display. Shock, disbelief, confusion. Something that might have been hope before his expression shuddered back to careful neutrality. Dr. Morrison continued speaking about prenatal vitamins and appointments, but Kiera could not hear her over the roaring in her ears. Pregnant. 8 weeks. That meant. She looked at Jean and saw him calculating the same mathematics. 8 weeks ago had been the night after a particularly dangerous event, when a rival faction had threatened Jin's operations, and he had eliminated the threat with brutal efficiency. He had returned late, still wearing the metaphorical blood, and Kiera had been awake, unable to sleep knowing he was in danger. They had not spoken about what happened that night. The comfort that became something more. The boundaries that dissolved in darkness and desperation and need. They had not repeated it, had not acknowledged it. Now they could not ignore it. "That's impossible," Jean said quietly after Dr. Morrison ended the call. 5 years ago I was told I could not have children. Extensive damage from injuries. Multiple specialists confirmed it. His dark eyes found Kiera's. "I have been careful with others since then because I believed I was infertile. That night with you, I did not think." Kiera's hand moved to her stomach instinctively. "I did not think either. I was not worried because." She stopped. Because why would she worry about pregnancy with a man who believed he was sterile? "I did not plan this, Jean. I did not trap you." "I know," Jean said immediately. "You are not that kind of person. This is." He seemed at a loss for words for the first time since she had known him. "An impossibility. A miracle I did not think I could have." His voice dropped. "What do you want to do?" Kiera took a shaking breath. "I do not know. This changes everything. A baby complicates the arrangement. Makes everything more permanent. More dangerous. You said yourself that being near you invites risk. A child. A child makes you vulnerable," Jean finished. Makes us both vulnerable. His jaw tightened. It also makes this real. Not an arrangement. A family. He stood and moved to the window, staring out at the city. 4 or 5 years I believe my line ended with me. That everything I built would die when I died because there was no one to inherit it. Now there is a child. My child. Yours and mine. He turned back to face her. I am terrified and grateful in equal measure. But if you want this baby, if you choose to continue this pregnancy, then understand, everything changes. You are not just my companion anymore. You are the mother of my child. That means protection increases. That means you become untouchable in my world. That means we figure out how to make this work, because I will not abandon my child the way I abandoned my sister. Kiera felt tears slide down her face. I want this baby. I did not know I wanted it until Dr. Morrison said the words. But I do. I want your child, Jean. Even though it terrifies me. Even though I do not know how to be a mother. Even though this is the most complicated situation imaginable. She stood and crossed to him. I want this. With you. Jean pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. His voice was rough when he spoke. Then we do this together. We protect this child. We build something real instead of just surviving. He pulled back to look at her face, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. A miracle neither of us thought possible. That has to mean something. Kiera leaned into him and let herself believe that maybe impossible things happen more often than she thought. Maybe men who believed they were broken could be healed. Maybe women who believed they had to sacrifice everything could find they gained more than they lost. Maybe a child conceived in darkness could grow into light. She had accepted Jean Tying's arrangement to save her brother. Now she was carrying his child and falling in love with him and building a family from the wreckage of their separate loneliness. The mathematics were still impossible. But for the first time in months, Kiera believed that impossible did not mean hopeless. Sometimes it just meant unexpected. Sometimes it meant miraculous. The days following the pregnancy revelation moved with strange intensity, like time had compressed and expanded simultaneously. Jean did not pressure Kiera for decisions about their future beyond the immediate. He arranged for prenatal care, a private obstetrician who came to the estate twice weekly to monitor everything. He ensured Kiera had access to whatever she needed, from specialized foods to prenatal vitamins that cost more than her old monthly rent. His behavior shifted in ways both subtle and obvious. More protective, more present. She noticed security had doubled around the estate. Armed guards who had been discreet were now visible. Cameras had been added to every approach to the guest house. When Kiera asked why the increased security, Jean was honest with brutal directness. A child makes you vulnerable in my world. Enemies will see this as leverage. They will calculate that I value you and the baby enough to make concessions. I will not allow that calculation to become action. You are protected by an army now. Anyone who attempts to reach you will not succeed. His words should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a complicated relief. Jean understood his world's dangers and was taking them seriously. He was not pretending safety existed where it did not. She respected his honesty even as it forced her to confront realities she had been carefully avoiding for 4 months. Being Jean Tying's companion had felt like playing a role. Carrying his child meant she was permanently part of his dangerous world, whether she wanted to be or not. 5 days after learning she was pregnant, Kiera told Marcus during one of her daily hospital visits. He was looking healthier, gaining weight back, his color improving as the treatment continued showing success. She sat on the edge of his bed and took his hand. I have something to tell you. I am pregnant. Marcus's eyes went wide. Ki, is it? He stopped, carefully not finishing the question in a way that made Kiera love him even more for his tact. Yes, Kiera said quietly. The baby is Jin's. It was not planned, but I am happy about it. Scared but happy. Marcus processed this information with the careful intelligence that defined him. Does he know? He knows. He is. Kiera searched for the right words. He is supportive. He wants the baby. He is making sure I have everything I need. Marcus squeezed her hand. Are you safe, Ki? Really safe? Because if you need out of whatever arrangement you have with him, we can figure something else out. I can stop treatment. We can. No, Kiera interrupted firmly. You are not stopping treatment. You are getting better. That is the only thing that matters. And yes, I am safe. Jean is. She paused. He is a good man in complicated ways. He takes care of people he cares about. He cares about me, and now he cares about this baby. We are protected. You love him, Marcus said. It was not a question. Kiera felt tears threaten. I think I do. I did not mean to. It just happened. He sees me, Marcus, not as a responsibility or a burden. He sees who I am and values it. That is rare. Marcus pulled her into a hug. Then I am happy for you. And I am going to be an uncle. That gives me more reason to fight. He pulled back to look at her seriously. But Key, if he ever hurts you or that baby, arrangement or not, money or not, I will find a way to make him regret it. Kiera laughed through tears. Jean said almost exactly the same thing to you. You two are more alike than either of you realizes. That evening, Jean found Kiera in her dance studio. She was moving through gentle stretches, adjusting to her body's changes. He stood in the doorway watching until she noticed him and stopped. We need to talk, he said quietly. About why I believed I could not have children. About what happened 5 years ago. You deserve the full truth. They moved to her living room. Jean sat across from her, hands clasped, posture tense in a way she rarely saw. 5 years ago, I was involved in a territory dispute with a rival organization, the Nakamura Group out of San Francisco. They wanted to expand into Los Angeles. I refused to cede territory. Negotiations failed. It became violent. He paused, jaw tight. They ambushed me during what was supposed to be a final peaceful meeting. 3 men with guns. I took 3 bullets to the abdomen before my security could respond. The damage was extensive. Intestinal perforation, internal bleeding, damage to surrounding organs. I spent 2 weeks in surgery, months in recovery. Jin's voice remained controlled, but Kiera heard the echo of trauma underneath. The doctors said the damage to my reproductive system was severe. Scarring, vascular damage, structural issues. For different specialists confirmed I would not be able to father children. I made peace with that. Decided my legacy would be my empire, not biological children. For 5 years I believed that truth. His dark eyes met hers. Then you. Then this baby that should not exist. The doctors were wrong, or my body healed in ways they did not predict, or fate decided differently. I do not know which. I only know this child is impossible and real. Kiera moved to sit beside him, taking his hand. Does it scare you? Becoming a father terrifies me, Jean admitted. I barely knew my own father. He died when I was 12. I have no template for how to be a good parent. I only know how to build empires and eliminate threats. But I want to try. For you. For this child. I want to be better than what I am. You already are better than you think, Kiera said softly. You saved my brother. You protected me. You give people second chances when your world usually does not allow for mercy. That is the foundation of good fatherhood. Caring more about someone else's well-being than your own comfort. Jean pulled her close, his hand moving to rest on her stomach where their impossible child grew. I will protect you both with everything I have. That I promise. The promise felt like a vow. Kiera leaned into him and tried to believe that love and violence could coexist without destroying each other. That a man capable of killing could also be capable of tenderness. That impossible children born into dangerous worlds could still grow into safety. The threat emerged 3 days later. Jin's head of security, a former military operative named Dmitri, brought urgent news during breakfast. Sir, we have intercepted communications from the Choi faction. They have been watching the estate. They know about Miss Hayes. They know about the pregnancy. Jin's expression went cold in a way that made Kiera's blood chill. She had seen him intense, focused, serious. She had never seen him like this. Empty. Dangerous. The kind of cold that preceded violence. What do they want? Dmitri handed Jean a phone showing a text message. Surrender your West Coast territories, or the dancer becomes ours. 24 hours to respond. Jean read the message without visible emotion. Then he stood and made a series of calls, voice rapid in Korean, commands given with absolute authority. Kiera sat frozen at the table, fear crawling up her spine. She had known abstractly that danger existed in Jin's world. But this was concrete. Specific men wanting to kidnap her, to use her and her baby as leverage against Jean, to hurt him through her. When Jean finished his calls, he turned to Kiera. Pack a bag. You are moving into the main house immediately. Additional security is being assigned. You do not leave the property under any circumstances until this is resolved. How will you resolve it? Kiera asked. Her voice shook despite her attempt at control. Jin's eyes were flat and cold. The Choi faction ends. Tonight. Every leader, every lieutenant, every soldier who knew about this threat. Gone. They chose to target you. That was their fatal mistake. You were going to kill them, Kiera said. Not a question. A statement of reality she had been avoiding acknowledging for 4 months. Yes, Jin said simply. I am going to eliminate an entire organization that threatened my family. That is what I do. That is who I am. If that changes your perception of me, I understand. But I will not apologize for protecting what is mine. Kiera should have been horrified. Should have begged him to find another way. Should have run from this man who spoke of mass violence with such cold certainty. Instead, she felt a dark kind of relief. Jin was not pretending to be civilized. He was not offering half measures. He was promising total protection through total destruction. And some part of her, the part that had spent 8 months desperately trying to save her brother, the part that was now protecting an unborn child, understood. Safety required violence sometimes. Protection required eliminating threats permanently. Morality was complicated when survival was at stake. Do what you need to do, she said quietly. Keep us safe. That is all I ask. Jean crossed to her and cupped her face gently. You are stronger than you pretend. Most women would be crying or demanding I handle this peacefully. You understand that peace is not always possible. I understand that our baby needs to grow up in a world where threats against us do not exist, Kiera said. If that requires violence, then it requires violence. I chose you knowing what you were. I do not get to suddenly demand you be different when that darkness becomes necessary. Something shifted in Jin's expression. Respect. Possibly love. Definitely recognition that Kiera was accepting him completely, darkness and all. He kissed her forehead. I will return by morning. Trust that I will handle this. He left with half his security team. The remaining guards locked down the estate. Kiera moved into a guest room in the main house as instructed, but she could not sleep. She sat by the window overlooking the city and tried not to imagine what Jean was doing in the darkness of Los Angeles. Tried not to think about the men who would not see sunrise because they had threatened her. Tried not to calculate the moral cost of her safety. But she did think about it. Extensively. Jean was eliminating an entire criminal faction because they had targeted her. People were dying to keep her and her unborn child safe. That should make her sick with guilt. Instead, it made her feel protected in ways she had never experienced. Jean had promised her safety, and he was delivering it with brutal efficiency. The mathematics of morality had shifted. She no longer believed in absolute right and wrong. She believed in survival, in protection, in doing whatever was necessary to keep families safe. Marcus was alive because Jean had money. Her baby would be safe because Jean had power. Everything else was philosophical luxury she could not afford. At 3 in the morning, her phone rang. Jean. She answered immediately. Are you okay? I am fine, Jean said. His voice was steady but tired. The immediate threat is neutralized. I am handling final details. I will be home in 2 hours. Neutralized, Kiera repeated. That is a gentle word for what you did tonight. Jean was quiet for a moment. I eliminated 16 people tonight, Kiera. The entire Choi leadership and everyone who knew about you. That is the reality of protecting you. If that is too much, tell me now. It is not too much, Kiera said firmly. It is exactly what was necessary. Come home, Jean. I will be waiting. She heard him exhale, something like relief in the sound. I will be there soon. Kiera ended the call and sat in the darkness processing. 16 people dead because they had threatened her. 16 lives ended so hers could continue. The weight of that should have crushed her. Instead, it felt like inevitability. Jin's world operated on different rules. Violence was currency. Protection required payment in blood. She had accepted that world when she signed his contract 4 months ago. She was simply understanding now what that acceptance truly meant. When Jean returned at 5 in the morning, he was still wearing his suit, but it was rumpled and damp, a faint metallic scent clinging to him that Kiera recognized as blood and gunpowder residue. He found her in the guest room where she sat by the window watching dawn creep across Los Angeles. He stopped in the doorway, studying her face. Looking for judgment. Looking for horror. Looking for her to finally see him as the monster he believed himself to be. Kiera stood and crossed to him. She wrapped her arms around him and held tight. Thank you for protecting us. Thank you for being what you need to be so we can be safe. I am not afraid of you, Jean. I am grateful for you. Jin's arms came around her slowly, like he was afraid she might break or disappear. You should be horrified, he said quietly. Normal women would be. I am not normal, Kiera replied. I am a woman who accepted a crime lord's arrangement to save her brother. I am carrying that crime lord's impossible baby. I am building a life in a world most people never see. Horrified does not serve me. Understanding does. I understand what you did tonight. I understand why. I accept it. I accept you. All of you. Jean pulled back to look at her face. His eyes were vulnerable in ways she had never seen. I love you, he said. The words seemed pulled from somewhere deep. I did not plan to. I built walls to prevent it. But I love you, Kiera. You and this baby. You are my family now. Not an arrangement. Not a transaction. Family. Kiera felt tears slide down her face. I love you too. I have loved you for weeks, but I was afraid to say it. Afraid it complicated everything. But tonight proved that everything is already complicated. So I am choosing you. Deliberately. Completely. I want this life with you. I want to raise our child together. I want to build something real instead of just surviving our separate loneliness. Jean kissed her then, desperate and tender simultaneously, tasting like exhaustion and relief. When he pulled back, his hand moved to her stomach. This child will have everything I did not. 2 parents. Safety. Love without conditions. I will build an empire that protects rather than just accumulates. For you. For them. Kiera leaned into him. We build it together. Not just your empire. Ours. Our family. Our future. Whatever comes, we face it as a unit. They stood together as dawn fully broke over Los Angeles. 2 damaged people who had found each other through desperation and darkness, building something that should not work but somehow did. Kiera had made her choice. She had accepted Jin's world completely, violence and protection inseparably linked. She had stopped trying to maintain moral high ground and started focusing on survival. Some would call that corruption. She called it evolution, growing into the person required by circumstances rather than the person she had imagined being. She was no longer the desperate dancer who collapsed in a cultural center. She was Jean Tiang's partner, the mother of his impossible child, a woman who understood that sometimes love required accepting darkness as the price of safety. She had danced through desperation for months. Now she was dancing with danger, with love, with a man who had eliminated 16 threats before sunrise to protect their family. That was her reality. That was her choice. And she would live with it without regret, because the alternative was losing everything that mattered. Marcus was alive. She was safe. Her baby would be born into protection. Everything else was negotiable. Sometimes morality was not a luxury you could afford. Sometimes you chose the lesser evil and called it good enough. Sometimes you loved a monster and discovered he was more human than the saints who had turned away when you needed help. Kiera had made her peace with all of it. She was staying. 3 days after the Choi faction was eliminated, Jean confirmed what Kiera already knew in her bones. The entire organization had been dissolved. Leadership eliminated. Operations absorbed or destroyed. Remaining members scattered across the country with clear understanding that returning meant death. No more threat existed. The intelligence networks Jean controlled had verified it thoroughly. Kiera was safe. The baby was safe. Marcus was protected. The violence committed in their names had purchased absolute security. Kiera did not ask for details of what Jean had done during those dark hours. She did not want to know the specifics of how 16 people died. She only cared about the result. Her family was untouchable now. Jin's reputation had always been fearsome, but eliminating an entire faction in one night elevated him to a different level. Other organizations understood the message clearly. Touch what Jean Taeyong claimed and face total annihilation. No negotiation. No mercy. Just permanent removal. The brutality of it should have horrified Kiera. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had ever felt in her life. Jean had proven his devotion through action, not just words. He had transformed threats into memories and secured their future with violence and efficiency. She spent those 3 days resting in the main house as Jean handled aftermath logistics. When he returned each evening, she could see exhaustion in the tension of his shoulders, the shadows under his eyes. He was managing an empire while ensuring no remnants of the Choi threat remained. But he always came to find her before sleeping, checking that she was well, that the baby was causing no problems, that she needed nothing. His protectiveness had intensified into something almost overwhelming. Kiera understood. He had nearly lost them to a threat he had not anticipated. Now he was ensuring no threat could emerge without his advanced knowledge. On the fourth night, Jean came to her room later than usual. Midnight. She was awake, unable to sleep despite exhaustion, her mind processing everything that had happened. He stood in the doorway, still wearing his suit, looking at her with expression she could not quite decipher. Hunger mixed with relief mixed with need. "Can I stay with you tonight?" he asked quietly. "Not as obligation. Just, I need to be near you." Kiera pulled back the covers in answer. Jean removed his jacket and shoes and slid into bed beside her, pulling her close with careful awareness of her pregnancy. They had not been intimate since the night they conceived their child. Had not crossed that line again despite the attraction burning between them. Professional boundaries had kept them apart even as emotional bonds deepened. But tonight those boundaries dissolved. Jean kissed her slowly, thoroughly, like he was memorizing the taste of her. His hands moved across her body with possessive tenderness, claiming every inch of her as his. Kiera responded with equal intensity, pulling him closer, needing the physical connection as much as he did. When they made love, it was different from the desperate comfort of that first night. This was deliberate, claiming. Jean moved over her with controlled passion, his dark eyes never leaving hers, watching every response he drew from her. "You are mine," he breathed against her lips. "Every breath, every heartbeat, mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to love. Say it." "I am yours," Kiera gasped. "Completely. Only yours." Jin's rhythm increased, pleasure building between them like a storm. "And I am yours," he said roughly. "Every dark part of me, every broken piece. Yours to heal, yours to love, yours to keep. Forever, Kiera. Not an arrangement. Forever. Forever," she agreed, her body arching into his as they reached climax together, pleasure and emotion and commitment tangled inseparably. Afterward, Jean held her close. His hand splayed protectively across her stomach where their child grew. "This is mine," he said quietly. "You, the baby, all of you, completely and permanently mine." "And you are ours," Kiera responded, her hand covering his. "My family." The shift from his possession to their mutual belonging settled something fundamental between them. They were not just lovers. They were partners building something permanent. For days later, Marcus was strong enough for visitors beyond immediate family. Jean accompanied Kiera to the hospital, saying it was time he properly met her brother. Kiera was nervous. Marcus knew Jean had paid for his treatment and that she was carrying his child, but meeting the man was different from knowing about him. They found Marcus in his room looking healthier than he had in months. The CART therapy was working miracles. He had gained weight, his color was good, his energy returning. But his eyes went wary when Jean walked in behind Kiera. "Marcus, this is Jean Taeyong," Kiera said carefully. "Jean, this is my brother Marcus." Jean moved forward and offered his hand. Marcus shook it after brief hesitation. The two men studied each other with the careful assessment of people who both loved the same woman and needed to determine if the other was worthy. Jean spoke first, his voice respectful but direct. "Your sister is carrying my child. I intend to marry her. That makes you family. Your treatment continues indefinitely regardless of what happens between Kiera and me. When you are well enough, if you want to finish your education, I will pay for it. If you want to work, I will find you a legitimate position in one of my businesses. You have my protection for life. These things are not negotiable. They are my responsibility as the man who loves your sister and as the father of your future niece or nephew." Marcus looked to Kiera, saw her happiness, her certainty. He turned back to Jean. "Take care of my sister and that baby, sir. Or money and power will not save you from me finding a way to make you regret it." Jin's mouth curved slightly. "I believe you would. I respect that. A man who does not protect his family is not a man worth knowing. You are clearly the kind of man worth knowing." He pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to Marcus. "My direct number. If you ever need anything, call. If something ever happens to Kiera and you cannot reach her, call me immediately. You are not alone anymore, Marcus. You have family beyond your sister now." Marcus took the card and nodded slowly. "Thank you. For Key's life. For mine. For giving us both a future when we had none. I do not know what arrangement you two have, but I see how she looks at you. That is enough for me." The tension broken, They spent an hour talking. Jean surprised Kiera by engaging Marcus in discussion about his plans to study education, offering insights about legitimate business structures that could support nonprofit work. Watching them connect, seeing Jean treat her brother with genuine respect rather than obligation, made Kiera fall even more deeply in love. Jean was choosing to build bridges with the only family she had. That mattered more than all his wealth and power combined. 1 week after eliminating the Choi threat, Jean took Kiera to dinner at a private rooftop restaurant he owned. The entire floor was empty except for them, candles and soft music creating atmosphere that was deliberately romantic. Kiera wore a dress Jean had selected, midnight blue that accommodated her barely visible pregnancy. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and watched her across the table with expression that made her heart race. Midway through the meal, he set down his fork and reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a black velvet box and set it on the table between them. "Marry me," Jean said simply. He opened the box to reveal a ring that took Kiera's breath away. Diamond and sapphire, elegant and bold simultaneously, the kind of ring that cost more than most people earned in years. "Not as an arrangement," he continued. "As my wife. The mother of my child. The only woman who has ever made me feel like more than the sum of my sins. I want you permanently, Kiera. I want our child to have married parents who love each other. I want Marcus to have family beyond you. I want to build something real instead of just surviving. I want you beside me for the rest of my life. Marry me. Choose this. Choose us." Tears slid down Kiera's face. Yes, I will marry you, Jean. I choose you. I choose our family. I choose this life we are building together." Jean stood and moved to her side of the table, sliding the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Of course he had known her size. He pulled her to her feet and kissed her with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with his fearsome reputation. "You are mine now," he murmured against her lips. "Officially. Permanently. Irrevocably mine." "And you are mine," Kiera responded. "Every dangerous part of you. Mine to keep. Mine to love. Mine forever." The possessive declarations that defined their dynamic settled between them like vows. Neither of them was owned. Both of them were claimed. That distinction mattered. They had chosen each other deliberately, understanding exactly what that choice meant. Over the following days, they planned their future together. Jean arranged a small private wedding ceremony at the estate. Nothing ostentatious, just intimate commitment with people who mattered. Marcus would be there when he was released from the hospital. A handful of Jin's most trusted associates would attend. Kiera's few close friends who knew enough not to ask questions would witness. The ceremony itself would be simple but meaningful. Traditional vows mixed with personal promises. Jean was surprisingly engaged in planning details, wanting everything perfect for her. They designed the nursery together in the main house. Jean insisted the baby's room be close to theirs, security concerns and parental convenience equally important. Kiera chose soft grays and whites with touches of yellow, gender-neutral and peaceful. Jean ensured every safety feature existed, every possible protection in place. He read parenting books when he thought she was not watching. She would find him researching child development and infant care with the same intense focus he applied to business operations. His nervousness about fatherhood was endearing. This dangerous man who commanded an empire was terrified of holding a fragile infant. Kiera loved him more for the vulnerability. Marcus continued improving steadily. 6 weeks after beginning the CART therapy, his oncologist delivered news that made Kiera sob with relief. Complete remission. The cancer was undetectable in his blood. His body had responded better than they dared hope. He would need monitoring and follow-up care, but prognosis was excellent. Marcus could live a normal, healthy life. When Jean got the news, he pulled Kiera into his arms and held her while she cried. "Your brother is a fighter," he said quietly. "Like his sister. Both of you survived impossible circumstances. That strength is in your blood. It will be in our child's blood too." 2 months after the proposal, at 5 months pregnant with a visible bump she could no longer hide, Kiera married Jean Taeyong in a ceremony on the estate. She wore ivory that accommodated her pregnancy beautifully. Jean wore a classic tuxedo that made him look like dangerous elegance personified. Marcus, recently released from the hospital and looking healthy for the first time in a year, walked her down the improvised aisle through the garden. Only 20 people attended, but each one represented safety and chosen family rather than obligation. The officiant spoke traditional words about commitment and partnership. When it came time for vows, Jin's voice was steady and certain. I promise to protect you and our child with everything I am. I promise to build a life worthy of your faith in me. I promise to love you without conditions or limits. You made me believe in miracles when I had stopped believing in anything. I will spend the rest of my life earning that gift. Kiera's vows came from deep in her chest where love and gratitude lived. I promise to stand beside you through everything. I promise to love all of you, darkness and light together. I promise to build our family with you and to never forget that you saved me when I was drowning. You gave me Marcus's life back. You gave me our child. You gave me yourself. I will treasure that forever. When the officiant pronounced them married, Jin kissed his wife with barely restrained passion, his hands cradling her face like she was the most precious thing in existence. The small gathering applauded, but Kiera heard only her own heartbeat and Jin's whispered words against her lips. My wife. My family. Mine forever. At the reception, Jin watched Kiera dance with Marcus, brother and sister laughing together with joy that had seemed impossible 8 months ago when she was collapsing from exhaustion and desperation. Marcus was alive, healthy, whole. Kiera was safe and loved and carrying new life. Jin had built his empire over 2 decades believing power was the only thing that mattered. Now he understood. Power meant nothing without people to protect. Money meant nothing without family to shelter. Everything he had accumulated was finally serving a purpose beyond survival. He was protecting something beautiful instead of just accumulating wealth and territory. One of his lieutenants approached carefully. Sir, the new territories are fully secured. Everything is stable. Good, Jin said. Make sure it stays that way. I am taking time off. His lieutenant's surprise was visible. Jin had never taken time off in 15 years. Jin's explanation was simple. I have a wife and a child coming. That is more important than anything else. The empire exists to protect them now. Everything else is secondary. Later that night, alone in their bedroom, Jin made love to his wife slowly and thoroughly, claiming her body as he had claimed her heart. You are mine, Kiera, he said as he moved over her. This baby is mine. This life is ours. Forever. Forever, Kiera agreed, her body and heart and soul belonging completely to this dangerous man who had caught her when she fell and never let go. She had walked into his cultural center 5 months ago dancing through desperation. Now she danced with joy, with love, with the certain knowledge that she was protected and cherished in home. Jin Taeyong was a criminal who had killed to keep her safe. He was also the man who watched her dance like it mattered, who loved her brother like family, who would do anything to protect their child. He was complicated and dangerous in hers, completely and permanently hers, just as she was his. They had built something impossible from desperation and darkness. Now they would nurture it into light. The wedding reception unfolded with quiet elegance on the estate grounds. String lights illuminated the garden. Soft music played from speakers hidden among carefully arranged landscaping. And 20 guests who understood the weight of what they were witnessing celebrated 2 people who had found each other through impossible circumstances. Jin stood apart from the small crowd for a moment, glass of champagne untouched in his hand, watching his wife dance with her brother. Kiera was radiant despite her pregnancy, moving with the grace that had first captured his attention 5 months ago. But now she danced with joy instead of desperation. Marcus looked healthy and whole, his laughter carrying across the garden, no longer the dying boy in a hospital bed, but a young man with a future. Jin felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Peace. For 20 years he had built an empire brick by bloody brick, accumulating power and money and territory because survival demanded it. He had filled his life with violence and calculation and the cold mathematics of control. Every decision had been strategic, every relationship transactional. He had believed that was enough. That power itself was purpose. Now, watching Kiera and Marcus dance while his unborn child grew safe in her belly, he understood. He had been surviving but not living, accumulating but not building. The empire existed to protect nothing until it existed to protect them. Family gave meaning to everything he had created. Love made power worthwhile. One of his oldest associates, a man who had been with Jin since the beginning, approached carefully. You look different, sir. Content. I have never seen you content before. Jin's mouth curved slightly. I have never been content before. He gestured toward Kiera and Marcus. That is what contentment looks like. Family. Purpose beyond just surviving another day. He turned to his associate. Make sure everyone understands. My priorities have shifted. The Empire serves to protect my family now. Anyone who threatens that will face consequences that make the Choi elimination look merciful. The message was received. Jin's reputation had always been fearsome. Now it carried an additional edge. He was no longer just a crime lord protecting territory. He was a father and husband protecting family. That made him infinitely more dangerous because there were no limits to what he would do. No negotiation. No mercy. Just absolute elimination of threats. Everyone in his organization understood. Touch Kiera or the baby and face annihilation, so complete your name would be erased from existence. After the reception, as guests departed and the evening wound down, Marcus pulled Jean aside. Thank you, he said quietly. For everything. For Key's life. For mine. For giving us both family when we thought we had lost everything. I will never be able to repay what you have given us. Jean studied the young man who would soon be his brother-in-law officially. You repay it by living well. By finishing your education. By being there for your sister and your niece or nephew. That is all I ask. He paused. I failed my own sister by being too focused on building power to notice she needed help. You remind me of her. Intelligent, kind, determined. I will not fail you the way I failed her. You are family now, Marcus. That means you have my protection and my support for life. Marcus extended his hand. Jean shook it firmly, sealing an understanding that went beyond words. They were family now, not by blood but by choice and circumstance and the woman they both loved. Over the following months, as Kiera's pregnancy advanced, Jin's protectiveness evolved into something almost overwhelming. At 6 months pregnant, she was healthy and glowing, but Jean treated her like precious glass that might shatter if handled roughly. Security around her was suffocating. She could not leave the estate without an armed escort. Jean insisted on accompanying her to every prenatal appointment. He monitored her diet, her rest, her stress levels with the same intense focus he applied to managing his empire. Kiera found it sweet and irritating in equal measure. You cannot wrap me in bubble wrap until the baby comes, she told him one evening when he suggested she stop dancing entirely. I am pregnant, not broken. My body knows what it is doing. Jin's jaw tightened with barely controlled anxiety. You are carrying the only child I will ever have. The only family I thought impossible. Forgive me if I am protective. Kiera softened at the raw vulnerability in his voice. She took his hand and placed it on her swollen belly where the baby was kicking enthusiastically. Feel that. That is your strong, healthy child who is not fragile. I need to move, Jean. Dancing is part of who I am. I will not give it up entirely even for this baby. Trust me to know my limits. Jean felt their child moving under his palm. Life he had created despite doctors saying he could not. His eyes met Kiera's. I trust you. But if anything happened to you or the baby because I did not do enough to protect you, I would never forgive myself. Nothing will happen, Kiera promised. We are safe. You have made us untouchable. Now let me dance so our child knows joy as well as security. Jean agreed reluctantly. Kiera continued dancing daily, adjusting movements for her changing body, finding new ways to move that accommodated pregnancy. Jean watched every session from the doorway, unable to help himself, needing to see that she was okay. She was more beautiful pregnant than she had ever been, he thought, glowing with life and health and happiness. She was his miracle made physical. The nursery was completed at 7 months. Jean had overseen every detail personally. Soft gray walls with white furniture and yellow accents. State-of-the-art security integrated seamlessly. Every safety feature imaginable. The room was positioned next to their bedroom with an adjoining door so they could hear the baby at night. Jean had installed cameras with views from multiple angles, not out of paranoia, but out of the absolute need to know his child was safe at every moment. Kiera teased him about being overprotective. Jean did not apologize. This child was everything. He would not take chances. Labor started early one morning at 38 weeks. Contractions woke Kiera at dawn. Jean was instantly alert, moving with controlled efficiency that barely masked his terror. He called the private obstetrician who arrived at the estate within 30 minutes. They had arranged for delivery at home rather than risking a hospital where Jean could not control security completely. The bedroom had been converted into a birthing suite with all necessary medical equipment. Dr. Morrison and 2 nurses attended while Jean stayed by Kiera's side, holding her hand through contractions that made her curse him for getting her pregnant in the first place. "This is your fault," she gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. "You and your impossible fertility." Jean kissed her forehead, sweat-dampened hair clinging to her skin. "I know. I am sorry. You are doing beautifully. So strong. Our daughter is lucky to have you as her mother." The labor was long and intense. 12 hours of pain and exhaustion, and Jean never leaving her side, speaking to her in English and Korean, telling her she was strong. She was almost there, just a little more. When their daughter finally arrived, crying lustily and perfect, Jean wept. Tears he had not shed since his sister died streamed down his face as he held his newborn daughter for the first time. She was impossibly tiny, dark hair and features that looked like both her parents blended, skin a beautiful warm brown. She was healthy and whole and real. His miracle. "What should we name her?" Kiera asked, exhausted but glowing with joy. "Maya," Jean said immediately. "It means miracle, because that is what she is. What you both are. Maya Taeyong Hayes. Our impossible miracle." Kiera's tears joined his. "Maya. Perfect. Welcome to the world, baby girl. You are so loved." Jean held his daughter with terrified gentleness. This tiny fragile life that depended on him completely. He had held guns and knives and delivered death more times than he could count. But holding his newborn daughter was the most frightening and beautiful thing he had ever done. "I promise to protect you," he whispered to Maya in Korean. "I promise to be better than what I was. I promise you will grow up knowing safety and love. You will never doubt that you are wanted. You are my greatest accomplishment, not my empire. You." The first months of Maya's life were a blur of sleepless nights and learning to care for an infant. Jean was surprisingly handsome despite his initial terror. He changed diapers and gave bottles and walked the floor at 3 in the morning when Maya would not settle. Kiera would find him in the nursery holding their daughter, speaking softly in Korean, singing traditional lullabies his own mother had sung to him before she died. The tenderness he showed Maya was profound. This dangerous man who commanded fear across the West Coast was utterly devoted to a 7-pound infant who controlled him completely with her cries and smiles. Marcus visited often, delighted with his role as uncle. He was enrolled in education courses at USC, living in a guest house on the estate, thriving in ways that would have been impossible without Jin's intervention. He and Jean had developed genuine friendship built on mutual respect and love for Kiera. Marcus would hold Maya and tell her stories about her mother's strength, about how Kiera had saved him, about how lucky Maya was to have parents who loved her so fiercely. Jean would watch and feel gratitude so intense it hurt. This was family. This was what mattered. Everything else was just mechanics of survival. 6 months after Maya's birth, life had settled into rhythms that felt permanent and right. Kiera had returned to dancing 3 times weekly at Jin's clubs, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She performed with Maya sleeping backstage, Jean watching from his private booth with eyes that never stopped appreciating her grace. She danced with joy now, her body fully recovered, moving with the freedom of someone who chose this rather than desperately needed it. Jin's empire was stronger than ever, his reputation fiercer, but he came home every night to his wife and daughter. Business was important, but family was everything. One late evening, Kiera stood in the doorway of Maya's nursery, watching a scene that made her heart overflow. Jean sat in the rocking chair holding their sleeping daughter, singing softly in Korean. He did not know she was watching. He was completely focused on Maya, his expression tender in ways he never showed anyone else. The man who eliminated threats without hesitation was utterly gentle with his child. The crime lord who commanded an empire was devoted to a 6-month-old who ruled him completely. Kiera thought back to the night she had collapsed in his cultural center, certain her life was ending, drowning in impossible circumstances with no hope of survival. She had been so wrong. That night had not been an ending. It had been a beginning. Everything she had now, Marcus's health, Maya's existence, Jin's devotion, started from her desperation and his loneliness colliding in that moment when he caught her before she hit the floor. They had built a family from impossible circumstances. They had created life when doctors said it could not exist. They had found love in darkness and turned it into light. The empire Jean created to fill his emptiness now protected everything that mattered. The money he accumulated served to shelter his family. The power he wielded eliminated threats before they could materialize. Everything had purpose now. Everything meant something beyond just survival. Kiera entered the nursery quietly. Jean looked up and smiled, that rare expression that transformed his face from dangerous to beautiful. "Come sit with us," he said softly. She settled beside them, her hand resting on Maya's tiny back, feeling her daughter's breathing steady and peaceful. "This is what happiness looks like," she said quietly. "The three of us together. Safe, loved, whole." Jin's arm came around Kiera, pulling her close without disturbing Maya. "5 years ago I believed I was broken in ways that could not be fixed, that I would die alone with nothing but money and blood on my hands. Then you collapsed into my arms, and everything changed. You gave me hope. You gave me family. You gave me this." He gestured to Maya, to their life, to the peace they had carved from darkness. "You gave me miracles when I had stopped believing in them. You caught me when I fell," Kiera replied. "You saved Marcus. You protected us. You built this family as much as I did. We saved each other, Jean. That is what makes this work." They sat together in the quiet nursery, city lights visible through the window, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them. Kiera thought about dancing through desperation for 8 months, working 3 jobs, watching her brother die slowly, feeling hope drain away day by day. She thought about the impossible offer from a dangerous stranger, the choice she made to accept his arrangement, the way that choice had transformed into genuine love, the unexpected pregnancy that should not have existed, the violence committed to protect them, the compromises she made with morality to keep her family safe. All of it had led here, to this moment, to this impossible, beautiful peace. She had danced through desperation, 3 jobs barely enough, a dying brother, and no hope until the night she performed for a man who had stopped believing in miracles. Now she danced because she wanted to. Her brother was alive and thriving, and the man who caught her when she fell had given her a daughter, a family, a future. Jean Taeyong had thought he could not have children. Kiera Hayes had thought she could not save her brother. Both had been wrong. Sometimes fate required you to collapse into the arms of a dangerous man, accept his protection, fall in love with his darkness, and create the impossible together. Their daughter stirred in Jin's arms, making small, contented sounds. Kiera's hand found Jin's. Their family, forged from desperation and devotion, secured by violence and love, was everything neither of them believed they could have. And it was real, permanent, theirs. The mathematics that had once been impossible now made perfect sense. Love plus protection plus acceptance equaled family. Everything else was just details. They had chosen each other deliberately, understanding the costs and consequences, and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their separate loneliness. That was their truth. That was their miracle. And they would protect it fiercely for the rest of their lives.